morning. Hi to everyone who is watching us, and also hi to Carmen and Mark. I'm very happy to talk to you today about fiscal and fiscal narratives and ways we can talk about complex economic issues in a way that everyone understands. So my first question would be to you, Carmen. So do you think that conservatives and progressives have a different way of talking about fiscal policy and economic issues? And maybe also, do you think there is there something we could maybe even learn? Maybe do they have simpler language? So I would be interested in what you think about it.
Thanks, Florian. Also, thanks for giving me the opportunity to be here today. Well, actually, the framing of this panel kind of made me think a bit differently than usually about these issues, and about something I would call, the conservative and maybe the progressive narrative. Spoiler, there's probably a lot to learn on the progressive side with respect to that narrative. But maybe we can dig a little bit into what we think the conservative narrative is. And maybe to start with language and with the metaphors that are being used. We know this from the financial crisis, and we know this all along when it comes to fiscal expansion, that metaphors are being used that kind of that have a restrictive impact. That would be something like we have to tighten our belts, or we have to do our homework. We should not live beyond our means, and anything that would be along the lines of generational justice would mean that we could not leave debt behind for future generations. And while I do think this is a fundamental misconception, and to understand it a bit better, I think it's worthwhile to look a bit into the history, and by that we can understand where this is coming from. And I was reading a bit about savings as a German virtue, and how that was constituted very early on in early times of industrialization. So the classical Sparkassen we know in Germany, so the savings banks, they were institutionalized from very early onwards, say the early 19th century. And what's impressive is that even actually Karl Marx said that savings and labor and thriftiness are cardinal virtues of capitalism. And while these savings banks that were institutionalized mainly to integrate the social classes or lower social classes financially. And I think there were two reasons for that. So one was obviously to sort of empower people to generate savings for their future living. So if they wanted to build a household, or if they wanted to get married, that they would have something aside, that they would have saved something for the future. So in a sense, this part of financial integration led to an individualization, or was an individualization of the need to finance oneself and to take care of oneself. And then on the other hand, it also meant a sort of containment, because there's a quote, I actually wrote it down, that is from the German State Dictionary in 1865, which said that saving deposits serve as a dam against communist desires and revolutionary thoughts as they arise in those who have nothing to lose. So by that, it was also meant when populism and the question of finance in general became a social issue, it kind of meant to integrate people such that they would refrain from any kind of upheaval. And I do think that this is a really strong and powerful it was a really strong and powerful means in order to integrate people financially, and maybe also with respect to other countries, like in Germany, this institutionalization of savings as being something good, as thriftiness of being something virtuous, was much stronger in Germany because it was so institutionalized, whereas in the US, for example, savings banks were not necessarily helped by the state, and their appearance was much more fragmented along the states. So maybe this gives us already a little bit of a glimpse why the savings narrative and the conservative narrative about saving and thriftiness is so strong.
Thank you, Carmen. Mark, maybe, I would be interested in, do you think it's actually something special for German, that idea of saving a lot? I mean, probably we have savings banks, but for example, home ownership is also a way to save, probably, which is higher in other countries. So, what do you think? Is that is the idea of thriftiness, of saving, is that something that is that is particularly German?
Yeah. Also from my side, thank you for having me on this panel. I'm not so sure it's particularly German with respect to the private sector, because as you said, we have other countries with much higher home ownership rates, also on saving rates. Not so sure the difference for the private sector is so big across countries. But when it comes to government saving, then maybe there are some peculiarities which make the German debate different from the debate in other countries. And the idea that the state has to act or behave in the same way as the private household, that, from my experience, as a journalist, also reporting from other countries, having lived in other countries, that is something that is special to the German debate, or at least was. I think it's about to change. It's changing a little. But certainly, this idea, that the state is but a household, but a big household, right? And the metaphor Angela Merkel brought up in the Euro crisis, the Swabian housewife, right? So the Schwäbische Hausfrau, and just as she cannot spend more than she has, a government cannot spend more than it has in terms of accumulated financial resources. And so I'd say that this is something we have that is special for Germany, or probably for Northern Europe, more generally speaking.
And
also, because we're talking about narratives, and can you change them or make them more adequate to reality? And if I thought about this Swabian housewife metaphor, right? So she cannot spend more than she has, or he, but could also be a houseman. So if you think about it, right? What if the Swabian housewife or the Swabian houseman decides to buy actually a house? Okay, so he or she wouldn't buy that house out of its pocket. So probably he or she would take out a loan. So if we think about developing this metaphor, then the Swabian housewife becomes the true Swabian housewife or house owner wife, and then things change because you cannot buy a house with your pocket money. So there we probably get closer to where we want the debate on public finances also to be.
Yeah. So what you did now is basically you try to assess whether the Swabian housewife allegory is useful in an economic context. But I'm also interested in the question, where does the allegory come from? And you said, it could also be a houseman. And I wonder whether that's actually true, or whether or not the idea of the housewife is, the Swabian housewife is someone who provides for her family, and she's definitely a conservative and prudent person, a righteous person, and from those conservative values, it is derived what she should do, and those values are then used to say, okay, the state should do the same. So my question would be, but basically, do you agree? Do you think that the allegory comes from those conservative values? And maybe it isn't enough to talk about the fact if those values work on a government level, but maybe also to talk about those values and and maybe find a progressive narrative and hold it against them. I don't know, maybe Carmen or Mark, whoever wants.
So, I mean, that's definitely worthwhile to think about if it's something that comes from a mere like conservative perspective on the role of men and women. But I mean, what we know like from the development economics literature is often that like microfinance or so is given to women because usually they are out to be better on the management of resources. And maybe to make that backlash again to the economic history of savings, it is that, well, bringing people into savings accounts also meant that they would give up on their lifestyles that involved like alcoholism or gambling or any of those things that were considered like wasting money. And in field experiments, we know that women provide better for their family, or at least in this development context, they often provide better for their families, and that may play into that. Well, about creating, well, maybe, I don't know, Mark, if you want to add something, but on creating a progressive narrative, I'd start somewhere else and not so much on the financial policy rule set sort of from which we plan how we want to live as a society, but I would change things around and change the viewpoint and say that we need to look at the challenges we have to face. And from that on, we'd apply finance functionally and maybe come up with some images that spin around the progressive narrative that also employs other values than a conservative narrative.
Because I think it's an important point, also the point you made, that, you know, can you, or do you have to, in order to change that narrative, do you have to change the very nature of that narrative being a conservative one, regardless of whether it's applied to the private sector or the public sector? And I'm not so sure about that, because you have countries which are very conservative, the US, the UK, if it comes to, you know, private sector, my home is my castle, and so on and so on, but still have a more progressive, probably fiscal policy, approach to fiscal policy in terms of spending more than you have. So, so I wonder whether it's not more fruitful to talk about how to change that government narrative and not to change the entire society in a way, because that's much more difficult. And if you want to, if you talk about fiscal policy, there are probably easier routes to get to the point where we have a more rational discourse than to, you know, start from the very beginning.
Yeah, but I wonder whether the discourse is like if just the German discourse is more conservative in general than the American, for example, or if it's something that is special for the economic debate. So, for example, if you go into New York and you go to a stand-up comedy show, and they are usually hilarious, I love them. But like whenever they make jokes that are somewhat oriented to sex issues, like everyone is like, oh, so they are definitely more conservative when it comes to those questions. They are less conservative in the economic debate. So if you our economic debate, I often have the feeling that it's that it comes from a Calvinist perspective, like the idea that humans are inherently bad, and therefore we have to contain the sins with something like a debt break. If we don't have a debt break, then then evil politicians who only think about their next elections will spend a lot of money, and then we will end up in the abyss with lots of inflation. So the question is that something we have to tackle? Like, is it possible to have a narrative of like of politicians who think of something good because they want to tackle the issues that are ahead, like financing the transition of the economy against climate change. Like, is it possible to create such a positive picture of what democracy can achieve, so that we are not afraid anymore of what the politicians could do if we give them a little more freedom by, for example, abolishing the debt brake?
I may tap in here. So, Mark, I totally see your point. I mean, I was not trying to say that you need to change all values of society in order to be able to speak about progressive fiscal policies. I rather think that the mechanisms employed, and I mean, that those are usually highly technical, and the images they use often come from a conservative viewpoint. But that is not to say that or that is to say that we should probably reshape at least what we think the state is. And maybe on those lines, I mean, this year's Innocracy is called Democratizing Democracy, and we may need to talk a little bit about how to make the talk about fiscal expansion and expansive fiscal policies more accessible. And I think what the conservatives do very well is to frame fiscal policies in a very technical way. That is to say, there are politicians, may they be good or not, but in any case, those are the guys deciding on a very technical issue we don't really understand. And if we want to make it more accessible, I think we need to find images that are more understandable and valid for, I say, normal people that have nothing to do with public finances. And maybe one mechanism how that technical language is employed. I mean, if we think about terms like austerity or so, I think those terms kind of they veil a bit, or they really kind of they mean that I use a technical term for something that has devastating social and economic consequences for certain people in society, for the lower classes mostly, or in the southern countries, the youth, for example. And I think it's quite important to be aware that if we don't provide the language for people to relate to what it means if the state spends money for our future, with respect to all the challenges we have to face, from the climate catastrophe to education, to digitalization and to demographic change, then it's very difficult to set up such a progressive narrative.
Yeah, I totally agree. So you have to make sure that you have metaphors or narratives that are understandable. That's why I was talking about the Swabian housewife in that context. You know, everyone understands that if you buy a house, you need to take out a loan. So if the government invests, it probably makes sense to take out a loan. And not only this, I mean, there are many ways in which economic narratives conceal or shape the way we look at things. So to take another example, you know, fighting inflation, right? So the standard, you know, German thing you would read in the newspapers, not in our newspaper, but many newspapers, would be, yeah, prices are going up, the central bank has to step in and fight inflation. And this is presented as you know, as a win-win situation, as if there were no costs at fighting inflation. It's just, you know, the central bank steps in and magically inflation goes down and everyone's fine and nothing else changes, which of course is not how monetary policy works. It works through depressing output, increasing unemployment. In the standard employer, you're more the expert here, increasing unemployment, and then we're talking trade-offs. And you can still argue that it's worthwhile, you know, fighting inflation and accepting higher unemployment and lower output, but at least you have made clear in this argument that there is a trade-off. And this step, if you're a normal newspaper reader, you aren't aware that these kind of trade-offs exist. So I think this is another example where it would be really important to just by educating people how economic policy works, to make clear that there are choices, and politics is about choices. And I also wanted to make this point, or act on the point you made on, you know, politicians are evil creatures, right? So in a way, that's an extreme version of political economy, Anthony Downs type stuff. You know, the politician is only here to maximize his or her voters in the short term. And I think there's some truth to it. Knowing politicians, of course, it's about, you know, getting re-elected, but it's also overly simplifying. And maybe in the history of thought, you know, this idea that that is the only thing that drives politicians has been over exaggerated, and it is now still shaping our discourse. That you must not trust any of these guys. You know, create rules, balance of power, countervailing powers, so that they don't take all the money and run away in a way. And I think this really is also poisonous for the public debate, because it basically undermines any sense of positive uses of power in the Hannah Arendt sense, maybe, so that you get together, decide upon your collective actions, you know, decide as a society what you want to achieve. But this presupposes that you can actually trust the agents you are entrusting with carrying out what you want to do, i.e. the politicians. And so I think it's totally agree that it's also important to change this narrative, which is, I would say, pretty strong in the economic policy discourse in Germany as compared to other countries. I mean, Ordnungspolitik in the sense of constitutional economics in many other countries is some sub-discipline, whereas here in Germany it is still powerful. So I think this is clearly one of the elements to get to a more democratic, but also more efficient, to get to more efficient policy outcomes.
Yeah. So so that means we should address those voices who think of politicians as people who are inherently evil. And my question would be, like, how do we do that? And maybe do we also, as progressives, do we also need maybe to change the way we're talking about other center and center-right politicians? Because often also we as progressives, I find, talk about like conservatives in a way as if they had bad intentions. And of course the conservatives do the same when they talk about the left. And so the question would be, if we have a political discourse in which we all like say, oh, the others, they have bad intentions, and that's why they recommend other policies. Maybe is that kind of discourse also the root of the idea that people think, oh, politicians are evil, and they because they also talk about each other as if they were evil. So maybe would it also help if we talked differently to our political opponents in the center and the center right? I'm not talking like extremists, but like CDU people, for example.
I definitely say that it is highly unattractive if politicians are very self-referential. So it is not interesting, whether it be within parties or between parties, if no content is discussed, but people evolve around each other, criticizing what they've been saying, but not really bringing forward the discourse. And maybe that's something the progressives have lacked in the last time, to kind of create a positive counter narrative that does not only criticize the conservative narrative, but that kind of takes the values we have as progressives and puts them at the forefront by like showing solutions and showing images that are more worthwhile. And I think that could definitely help to democratize the debate. And when I speak values, I mean, the Swabian housewife is so interesting because it is a merely individual approach to a collective problem. And the idea is that we can use that individual lens in order to organize a state, so a collective. And I think a progressive value is always like solidarity and unity in that. And the ability also to be functional as a collective and to make collective decisions, not only because it's a value by itself to have everyone on board, but because these outcomes may be better, and they may be better for those who have to bear the consequences. So what we have to create is a more collective narrative of what the state is, what the state does, and how public investment, for example, benefits all of us, some more than others, but definitely, and especially those more that would kind of adhere to the collective thought. But in any case, reframing the state to something collective that is made up of each one of us. Yeah.
And maybe Mark, do you have you also have lived in other countries where you said the economic discourse is a bit more progressive. Do you remember maybe campaigns that have achieved what Carmen just proposed? That is like a positive narrative and about economics and what politics can achieve with economics, where that has worked. So like maybe like a positive example we could look at.
Not aware of campaigns, but certainly the level of policy advice and so on seems to be more advanced in, say, the US and in the UK. But then again, you look at political outcomes and you wonder, right? I mean, is the US a much more progressive country than Germany? Is the UK? So you have all these top-notch schools and economists, and they are superstars on Twitter and everywhere else. But then you have a totally shitty government, and you have Brexit, and Donald Trump became president. So maybe there are also limits to what you can achieve with economic policy advice. But the point I also wanted to make is that if we talk progressive economics and look to other countries like the US or the UK, I think it makes more sense to talk about progressive macroeconomics, because in many other policy areas, I'm not so sure these countries are really more progressive than Germany is in competition policy, social protection, and so on. There, the northern countries, in the North-South EU divide, usually have much more generous welfare systems than the southern countries, which have a more progressive macroeconomic debate. I mean, there's also this remember this talk about whether there's some logic to it, right? If you have, I mean, this is what an Ordnungspolitiker would argue now. If you have a well-defined social protection net, you can afford a slump, a macroeconomic slump, easier than if there's nothing. Like in the US, you just die if there's a recession goes on for too long, you die. You're hungry, or you go hungry at least. In Germany, this wouldn't happen. It will not happen. So this might be one of the reasons why, because automatic stabilizers and so on. So this might be one of the reasons why there's less talk of, or this discretionary element of economic policy making isn't as developed as it is in the other countries. So this was the descriptive part. And in my ideal normative world, we would combine a well thought through welfare state with a progressive macro policy, so that you don't have slums, but still you protect your people.
Yeah, it would be probably not in our best interest to abolish unemployment insurance to become better macro politics. But a very interesting point of view that so probably if you don't have like unemployment insurance, then crisis comes, then you have to have at least a good macro stabilization, otherwise you would have political unrest. So that's quite interesting. So, but what you said, what I also found interesting is definitely the US and the UK. They have like the bigger think tanks, and like they have lots of super smart people. But apparently, although there are all those super smart people in those think tanks having great ideas and being stars on Twitter, it didn't like help to keep populism down. So, Carmen, do you have an idea why that is the case? So, like even if you have like apparently a good economic policy debate, that apparently that doesn't necessarily need to, for example, more progressive, micropolitics in a sense of like having a more distributive state. So yeah, what do you think? Like how do those two together to have like a more progressive and very well informed elite discourse, but still not really progressive tax policies?
So probably both. I mean, the term populism, I think it's a bit difficult to apply because it's a very broad term that can mean a lot of things. That can mean the rise of Donald Trump, and it can also mean that you could also refer to the movement of Bernie Sanders, for example, to tell what populism is. But then I would say I'd feel that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for example, the Congresswoman, uses sort of populist language in order to convey the message of progressive economic policies. And she would do that by employing very simple images and using very simple examples that are approachable to people and that reference the own vida and the own life to what is happening politically. So in that sense, I would state that this kind of populism is something that is, well, useful to democracy because it democratizes the debate on otherwise very, very technical terms. And with respect to think tanks, I mean, I think, in Germany we have you guys from the Dezernat Zukunft. We also have Fiscal Future. We have certain players and think tanks that try to dig a bit through fiscal progressive fiscal policies and explain them to a broader public. But I'd still think that this is very much an offer for people that are interested in financial and economic policies and that may have the ability to step through a more or less technical paper. And so I would in that sense argue that you need both. You need you need a better technical grasp on these things, but using easier language, which think tanks usually do. But in the political realm, you probably also need some images and very approachable scenarios and metaphors in order to convey that message.
Can I add something here? I think this is really crucial because what AOC did in the tax debate, she made in a very efficient way, she made clear that a 70% top marginal tax rate doesn't mean you pay 70 cents on your dollar from the first dollar you earn. Now, if you're an economist or interested in economics, you would say, oh, obvious, everyone knows this. No. So if we talk about the top marginal tax rate in Germany, if you're just, the regular newspaper reader, you get the impression that you pay 42% if you're in the top tax bracket, that you pay 42% on every euro you earn. Because the difference between, of course, the marginal tax rate and the average tax rate is not spelled out. And that's, as an example of inflation or the Swabian housewife, these are concepts that seem to be so well established that it's really tough to challenge them in the general interest discourse, not in the economics discourse, but in the way, the newspaper I write for our readers and so on. It's it's really interesting how many letters you get, when you just when you only in an article, you just explain this very simple distinction, right? Which is totally simple. But again, it's many people are not aware of it because it's not conveyed if you watch TV, because it is, it requires a little bit of thinking on terms of the author or journalist to make this extra step, and most people don't like to do it because on TV you only have 1 minute or 30 seconds. In a newspaper, it makes your article a little bit more complicated, so you better skip it. And because of this way of going about things, these concepts have become entrenched and are established, and they are politically powerful. I mean, they shape the way politicians also think about things, because also many of them aren't experts. I mean, of course, the experts in the in the parliamentary committee and so on the budget, but not the average member of parliament. So if you talk about democratizing the debate, the second step would be to find better metaphors. The first step would probably be to deconstruct the wrong metaphors that are around and that are so powerful. I mean, you're doing this at It's in our Zukunft, with the way monetary policy operates, and I think there's so much work to do. And maybe it's so important in Germany because there seems to be a lot of public interest in these issues, right? I mean, in France or the UK, people, it seems to me, don't really care about what the central bank does. They're just this stuff, brings the money and that's it. Whereas in Germany, for historical reason, we can talk about this also, there seems to be a lot of interest, and you can put it on the front page of Bild-Zeitung and people buy it. I mean, I don't think this would happen in France. So anyway, but this is the country we live in. So you have to probably accept this and then find ways how to rationalize this debate.
Yeah. So and do you like, maybe we need two sort of strategies if I listen to both of you, because what Carmen said, and I found that very convincing. You talked about AOC and how AOC makes things like tax policy accessible. Like, she goes to the Met Gala and she wears this dress that says "tax the rich." So and it's very simple. She says it's tax the rich. So it's not like what maybe like some right-wing newspapers would say, oh, taxes go up, so the progressive want the poor people to have even less. It's about the average person who has now who will have less money in his or her wallet. And she makes it very simple with 3 words. It's about tax the rich. And it's not in a way of someone who's like angry, who is like envious of someone. No, she's like at the Metropolitan Opera wearing a beautiful dress and saying, okay, that's just what we should do as the kind progressives whom we are. So I think that is very powerful on that populist. It's still a populist way of doing it, which is not necessary because it's accessible. But maybe we need that on the one hand, and then on the other hand also a different strategy for like the more for the economic policy discourse, like to how we talk to those people who already read the newspaper every day. Yeah, so because it's a different group of people. So do you think that would be something that we need different strategies for different target groups?
I definitely say yes for different target groups, but also, I mean, these are different functions. So one thing, and that's what Mark said just before, is that we kind of have to debunk the myths that are around, be it in terms of taxation or be it also in terms of making debts, because obviously one debt is another savings, and an investor and a saver are two sides of the same coin. They are twins. And well, we could also say maybe the debt break is an investment break or things like that, and that expenses equal revenues. I think like that is the one thing we need to do, find a clear language on how sectoral balances work, for example, and on how economic agents are related with one another via different institutions. I would say this is one thing. And the other thing would be, it would for me be, to find metaphors on what progressive policy is, that is maybe a bit populist, but still accessible and understandable, and also maybe refreshing. And when you talked about AOC, I mean, what's interesting is that, she is not she is not employing the mechanisms that conservatives would like her to employ. So anything in terms of greed or making other people worse off with socialist ideas. No, she just says this is better for all of us. So that's a very simple way to frame that, to normalize it, and also to have the confidence to do that. And I think that is what we are lacking sometimes when it comes to these debates.
Yeah. I think what you did is you need someone, and this someone cannot be a journalist or someone who just translates. It has to be a political actor, I believe. Someone who carries clout, and it can be on TV. And I think from time to time you need someone who steps in and just says, "Hey, stop talking bullshit. We are not trying to increase taxation for everyone, only for X 5% of the total population." And this very rarely happens, and also politicians rarely do that, because they get in, or they let themselves be put in the corner by by questions like, can you stick to the promise? Do you increase tax rates or not? Or are you not going to increase tax rates? And politicians usually try to find a way out of it. I'm not sure. But just to simply say as a politician, hey, your question is stupid. And sometimes I wish that this happened more often, right? So that politicians would in a way challenge us as journalists the way we challenge them. So that a debate can start, and just repeating our beliefs.
And that person that we are missing, that we is it like enough to because you said, oh, you should question the journalist question, basically, or if you should say, oh, that's the wrong question, we should talk about something else. The power of someone like AOC, in my eyes, is also that she has this positive language. If you, she's not aggressive. She has a positive narrative of what she wants to achieve, and if you think she's threatening, then because you think she has some bad intentions or what, but not because she has a threatening attitude. So do we have someone like her? Is there someone you have in mind who could play a similar role in the economic discourse in Germany?
So I wouldn't call names at this point. I would rather work on how we develop these metaphors that can shape this conversation. And I've been thinking about two, actually. So one would be, maybe starting again with what I wanted to say, not starting with the set of fiscal rules, but starting with the challenges we have to face. So we face the climate catastrophe. We know we need massive investment. We have to digitalize schools and institutions. We have the demographic change. with the corona crisis, we had sort of a bad impact, especially on lower classes with respect to education. And obviously the inequality, income inequality for the lower 50% in Germany has been worsened since the 90s. So if we want to think a bit about how to tackle these challenges, well, then we would definitely need to put an eye on the state and say, well, these are challenges that will not be tackled by the private sector alone, because incentives in given capitalist societies do not work that way. And well, if we were to employ an image I thought of and I really like, we can think of all the infrastructure that we have, all the bridges, lanes, rails, schools, houses, everything that is owned by the state, all the capital stock we have is built by former generations, and we are using this. This is what is our common capital stock in a country. And if I think of the state as someone that is representative of me or is shaped by me as an individual, I form part of it because we live in a democracy. Well, I say that there is a type of collective fortune that is managed by the state, and that is maybe different to the individual fortune I can acquire. And if I think of the state as an asset manager, I would definitely fire that guy, because he or she is letting the capital stock erode, and I would not be happy with the performance of how our capital stock is treated and how we create and maintain value as a society. And also, again, to have that line between individual and collective thought. Well, if the collective invests more, it also means that it's beneficial for myself as an individual, because the more the state invests, the less I have to invest in my future. If I have an accident, if I have to go to the hospital, if I want to have good education or be able to drive home safely because the road is not bumpy. So in that sense, the state that is made of us definitely has a responsibility to take care of our collective fortune. And it is something that I would like to inherit to future generations. Much more than zero debt.
Yeah. Well, and I'd like also to add on this, because I think it's a really important point that we talk about. If we talk about debt, right, we talk about financial debt, and we talk about one side of the balance sheet, of course, because with that debt, you don't spend it on whatever. Even if you spend it, but let's assume you don't spend it because you build a bridge, then it's not that the money is gone and there's nothing, there's a bridge. And this bridge has an economic value. And so this establishing what every business does, that there are two sides to a balance, also to the public sector balance sheet. And I mean, we can go into the details of accounting and how, and whether that should be reformed and so on. But I'm not talking about what makes more sense in terms of governance of the budget, but in terms of shaping the debate. It would be such a big step forward if we talked about debt not only in the financial way, but also in what we leave behind in terms of rotten infrastructure or a warming planet, and that if we fight this, if we improve infrastructure, fight climate change, then that's actually beneficial for future generations, which again is so easy. I mean, of course it is, but you find it still. I mean, things. I mean, can talk about this also. Things. I have the feeling that things are changing a little, but still you find it rarely in articles or TV contributions on budget negotiations, right? I mean, they're all about who gets what and will the debt limit be achieved or not. But very rarely does one talk about the budget as a way of expressing social choices and talking about our future, because that's what money is a way of to talk about the future. And this is something which is also really important to get this point across. We're not just taking on debt to take on debt, but we're taking on debt to finance stuff that helps our children to survive. In terms of, if we talk about climate change, to literally survive. And I also think that we, as journalists, people being part of the public debate, have a duty to explain that and to be more precise on that matter.
Yeah. So, but let me play the devil's advocate of the conservative person, because I would be very interested in what you say to it. Because usually, if you have a discourse and you try to talk about like the positive ideas of investment, what you basically just said, Mark, or improving our capital stock. That was your idea, Carmen. Then usually the conservative politician would say, yes, but you don't need debt for that. You could like also reduce the bad subsidies, or you could reduce some wasteful payments the state does. That's a quite powerful argument. I think it's I haven't often heard like good counter arguments against it. Do you have something in mind what you would tell to that conservative politician who would say, okay, we don't need more debt, we should just cut expenses?
So I would say, in a way, I mean, this argument is quite ideological, because it also says that, as a collective, we don't need this kind of collective fortune and this capital stock. And it would, it is the sort of conservative idea to always cut down bureaucracies and limit regulation, because that will kind of enable other processes. But that is also probably because the conservative narrative that is pretty much based on the individual would always not require that big amount of a collective good. Because if you have a car by yourself, you don't need public transport. And if you, I don't know, have a swimming pool for yourself, you don't need a public swimming pool. And I think that is merely, or that is mainly the reason why this argument is put forth, which is not to say that I'd be against cutting expenditures that are not necessary, but for the greater good and in face of the challenges we have, also to give an outlook for business that sort of crowds in. So in doing public investment, crowding in private investment, giving a positive business outlook with respect to the challenges, I think is crucial in order to, I don't know, foster demand and make economies prosper, and I don't know, guarantee the living standards we ought to have, and we should have the right to have. I think that's how I'd answer that.
I would, Florian, maybe say to a conservative politician, yeah, you're right. In an ideal world, it would be better to cut stupid stuff and use the money to finance investment, but we don't live in an ideal world. And so we are into second best. And if the question is, do I wait with the climate transformation fund until all the wasteful stuff is cut out of the German budget, then probably I will wait for another 10 years, because it's politics, right? It's not, it doesn't happen that quickly. Or do I say, well, I know that this investment generates a positive social return, so let's just do it. And let's talk about the wasteful subsidies later. They are wasteful, they should be get rid of, but number one priority, so say if I was the finance minister of that new coalition, which we'll be hopefully seeing soon, then I would say, number one priority is, get that transformation going. And if it costs money, just take out that money, just like the Swabian housewife or man takes out money to buy the house.
Yeah. The Calvinist conservative probably would say, we need the pain, so that we cut really the stupid stuff, because the stupid stuff doesn't get cut by itself. We only cut it if we need to cut it to finance the stuff we really like. So if we can get the nice stuff without cutting the stupid stuff, then we won't do it because it's so painful to cut it. So I think that is the narrative, the conservative narrative. And I think it's Calvinist in that sense, that it thinks, oh, the politicians they aren't inherent, they are inherently bad, and they only do stuff if they really need to. And do you think there's some truth to that narrative, or can we debunk it?
Maybe, I mean, the question, does it need to hurt, right? One more image I was thinking about, maybe to get across this a little bit. Since we're talking democratizing democracy, maybe we need to also, with respect to the collective image, we need to think a bit more of the state as made up of each one of us. So being sort of a greater body, and each one of us constitutes a cell. And at the heart of it is democracy. So democracy is what's at the heart of our state. And I mean, the heart is necessary to make the blood circulation go, to fill our vessels with blood. And usually you get oxygen filtered by your lungs, and that will bring fresh blood to all of the cells to regenerate themselves and reproduce themselves. And maybe something, that conservative take on that it has to hurt, or that you limit the ability of the state to do that job, is if this body started smoking all of a sudden, and would not only smoke a package, but maybe 2 or 3, and would with that mean that the quality and quantity of the oxygen you take in is much worse. And that will probably mean that at one point you will feel that your hand is getting quite cold because of the nicotine and the lack of oxygen. Some cells are, the vessels kind of tighten, and you don't feel your hand anymore. And thinking of this as the state, this would mean, well, this is a kind of, my hand is a rural area somewhere where there's no public transport anymore, and where people have sort of averted the state and have understood that the state is not taking the responsibility in order to generate the well-being and the state of life I want to have, and is not taking care of the needs I'm having. And if we think of it that way, smoking cigarettes hurts your lungs and it hurts your body, but it is not what is in any form desirable. But we'd rather have a healthy, functioning democratic system in which all the cells, so all the people that constitute the state, feel empowered and feel seen by the state and its decisions on public policy and public spending.
Maybe it's also an example of how concepts are used from the individual sector and being transferred to the public sector, right? So maybe in private life, what is nice also has to hurt, and I don't know, so it's maybe there it's correct, but in politics, I'm not so sure whether politics of pain is a good concept if people start to run away or start to vote for crazy parties. So of course there are constraints. I mean, there are real constraints, and I think it's important to talk about where these constraints are. It's not debt level X, Y, Z. It's what can your economy achieve in terms of the labor and the capital it has. And if all the labor and all the capital is busy producing, I don't know, TVs, there's not much labor and capital left for producing, the public infrastructure network we need for the climate transformation. So indeed there are constraints, and so the conservative politician you just alluded to would be right in pointing out we don't live in a dream world, right? So we have to deal with these constraints, but they are not where many people believe them to be, i.e. in a certain debt level, they are always in the real economy, and if they are not exhausted, then you can still do both in a way. So you don't have to for every dollar you spend or euro you spend on investment, you don't necessarily have to cut a euro in subsidies if your economy isn't running hot already, which probably it isn't. So also there, I think it's also important to deconstruct this thing that the debt level is the magical variable, when it's the capacity to produce stuff in the economy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's about how many people are unemployed, and we could give them a job and let them build stuff. Of course, it's not that easy because you need people to be trained, but that's all something you can solve with time and money. So, and money is not necessarily the constraint. It's only the constraint when there is already inflation. But in the last couple of years, we were in a situation where we had unemployment and very little inflation. So there was definitely capacity to do more, but we didn't do it. And I wonder why we didn't do it. And maybe one reason why we didn't do it is because we came from the Euro crisis. And in the Euro crisis, it was a very powerful narrative to say, look at what happened to those countries who had a lot of debt. Do you think it's how can we shift the conversation to the real constraints, especially after coming from the Euro crisis, where people were told, there was a lot of debt, and that was the reason why there were bankruptcies. So do you think the Euro crisis is still basically hindering us from looking at the real constraints?
So I do think that point is quite important, because obviously we live in historical times. So we come from an unchangeable past and we go into an unforeseeable future. And that is to say that past decisions will definitely shape what's going to happen next. And the Euro crisis, for sure, has sort of shifted the focal point on the economics discussion on debt levels, for example. But the idea of the debt brake was even older. And I think the Euro crisis and everything that happened around it helped to foster that narrative that thriftiness is a good thing, and that the debt to GDP ratio is the ultimate ratio on which we have to organize and focus our policies along. But also we have to see, because we live in historical time, times are different now. Financing conditions are very different. The challenges ahead are very different. We are still, in the hopefully soonish end of the Corona crisis. I mean, we have seen that the expansion of fiscal policy is possible when it's necessary. So maybe that is also something that can create a bit of a positive outlook, because we are in a moment right now where even the ordoliberal economists in Germany start to think about ways how to kind of circumvent the debt brake or find mechanisms, different technical solutions, which would, for the case of Germany, not require a change of the debt brake, which has constitutional status. So I do think, looking at the challenges, the financing conditions we have now, it should be rather easy to change the narrative, because we live in different times than 15, 20 years ago.
As you pointed out, I mean, when I was there when Olaf Scholz, finance minister, soon to be chancellor, announced this bazooka in March last year, and I was expecting a public outcry. This is the end of the world, all this money, inflation, and none of this happened. So people accepted that it's a good thing if the government increases its spending in a crisis as severe as the one we just went through. So in a way that maybe the Euro crisis narrative has or is already being transformed into something more more rational with respect to public debt. And also now with inflation, I mean, you see, you know, of course you see articles on panic and inflation and my money is gone and everything. But also, I would, I mean, I've been in the business for almost 20 years now in the media business, much more modest than I expected it to be. So maybe we are already, you know, on the right path. And as you said, Carmen, yesterday, Lars Feld, Freiburg economics, you know, the Ordnungspolitiker in the German context. He wrote an article in our newspaper with Marcel Pratschak from DRW, arguing, well, maybe we need a transformation fund to finance the climate change investments. So so maybe we are already, you know, we have already achieved a couple of the milestones we'd like to achieve.
Yeah, like, I mean, I definitely think that the discourse has shifted from 5 or 6 years ago. And as progressives, it's often, I feel that for progressives, it's often hard to say they have achieved something, because as a progressive, you want to achieve something, and therefore you can't really say that the present is better than the past, or at least sometimes people are afraid of doing so. But I think the German discourse definitely has shifted already to one that is maybe less conservative just than it was a couple of years before. So and do you think that like the idea of someone like Glasfeld, that he says, okay, we need investments for transformation. Will that also help us to look at European fiscal policy in a different way? Like will we be able to say, okay, we don't only need a transformation fund in Germany, but maybe it would also good to allow Italy more expansionary fiscal policies? Or do you think that when we will see new households in Southern Europe in the coming years, and they will probably be not as frugal as some economists want them here, do you think we will get like a discussion like in 2012 and 2013 again? Or did the discourse, who has already improved, like, will that also help us in the future in similar discourses?
Mark, what do you think? I'm still thinking about it.
I think in Europe it's always more difficult than in the European context. It's always more difficult than the national context, because it's very hard. It's very difficult to argue with if your government gives you money, right? So if you get Kurzarbeitergeld, so the short-time work scheme, who will say, no, we don't need this, you know, don't give me the money, please, let me be poor. In the European context, you always have this narrative, you know, we are helping lazy people in the South, and you can never totally get rid of this narrative, I would say. But also there, I see some movement. I mean, even in the debate on the reconstruction fund and in the European budget, this was supported by the CDU, the idea, and it was quite a step for the CDU to support this, and even conservative Rehberg, you know, conservative members of parliament supported this and said, you know, we are in a special situation. We have to show some kind of solidarity, and it's also in our interest. And I also did not expect this to happen, but it happened. And also there, Lars Feld played a role again, because he also sort of cautiously supported the idea that maybe we need to do more. And for me, it's always interesting to watch him, because, you know, if he moves, then conservative or liberal members of parliament, for them it's easier to move with him because he said it. So so he's, in a way, he shows you where the mainstream center-right discourse is heading to. So I'm also a little bit hopeful that some of the changes we just talked about are also happening there, albeit on a smaller scale.
And do you think there is more of communication between like progressive economists and conservatives? Because like you said, like Lars Feld now not changed his mind, but like came up with a proposal that was surprising to come from him. So do you think that like maybe we talk often about the negative aspects of social media, but maybe Twitter and the fact that you can read the ideas of everyone, does that help? Do you think we can learn from each other also in those forums, or are they only self-referential and we only retweet the people who already think the same that we do?
I mean, I'd say they are at least partly self-referential, but at least they are public so that others can join the debate. And they can join the debate without having had a name before or having had a degree from somewhere. So I think that's definitely positive, at least in the economics discipline and as far as I see it. Maybe what has shifted in general is the economic discourse, because I think probably in the Schröder era, it would have been very different to speak about progressive economic policies, and the lines of confrontation would have been much more ideological. Whereas I think as of today, we are all quite capable of looking at empirical data and see where the problems lie and see what we have to do. And we start from looking at data, at developments, at stylized facts, and then we start to discuss them. And obviously, well, the conservative and the progressive camp of economists or reporters, economic reporters, or even politicians would frame questions differently and would identify different problems that need to be solved, and then also offer different options for that. But in general, I do think we focus more around the problem, the empirical problem, and how to solve it. And especially now with respect to the corona crisis, I mean, we see a lot of movement, and we've seen very different proposals on how to be able to, or how to empower the states to be able to react to these challenges and shape our future. And that has been a debate that that has been rather open, and that has opened some space for different economic policy solutions, be it via a change in the debt brake, or be it with a credit finance reserve, or be it with public-private partnerships. So I think and social media is a good thing in these terms, and I do think that due to the development of the economic science, we are also at a different point in the policy debate today than we were 20 years ago.
I think it also matters that these people seem to get along. So the economists that are relevant to the public discourse, so they are younger. So there's been a change of generation. Clemens Fuß at IFO is not Hans Werner Sinn. I mean, he's still conservative, but he is he's just from a different generation. I mean, he lived abroad, studied abroad, everything. So the finance ministry played an important role with these organizing these roundtables with economists during the corona crisis. So these guys, they met and they discussed the proposals. So and that led to a situation where, despite the differences they still have, there seems to be an ability to conduct a rational debate about them, and I think this is really progress, so this is one of the good outcomes of the crisis, that there seems to be a problem-solving mentality among the main players in the German economic debate now, which we haven't seen in the Euro crisis, where it was about, I'm right, no, you're right, and my ideology is better than your ideology. and this seems to be a much more pragmatic now, and this is good.
Yeah, we have a question from the audience. The question is basically that it says that government policy like it affects everyone in the population, but has different impacts on social groups. Is that something we should maybe talk more about, and how is it possible to make sure that for example, people with lower income are not worse affected than others? Is there maybe a special language we should use to make sure that policies work in a direction we want it to work? So, for example, let me make an example. If we have, for example, a politics or policies that lead to an unemployment rate which is a bit higher, then usually also the salaries of poorer people they will increase not that much, because people are kind of desperate to get a job. If we use policies that are oriented at real constraints, and we drive unemployment down, and that's something actually that we can see in the US in the last couple of years, the people in the lowest income deciles had much higher wage gains than people in higher wage brackets, which hasn't been the case for like 20 years or so. So is that something we should maybe talk more about how something that seems to be prudent maybe has bad effects on some groups in the societies?
I mean, I think that the deal is that every kind of economic policy and financial policy will have one effect on some groups and another effect on other groups. I mean, just like globalization has produced winners and losers, every economic policy will have that, and that is sort of the trade-off we have to face. And that is also gearing the question a bit towards to whose ends are we making this policy. And I think there's a definite need to be more transparent about that, which groups will probably benefit more or less from a certain policy. In general, I would say that, I mean, every kind of general provision that aims at improving our infrastructure networks mobility will also lead to a higher and greater social mobility. And better equipped schools, for example, more digitalized schools will allow for students also from poorer backgrounds who cannot afford a private teacher to go through the contents again, will enable this student to keep up with his or her comrades. And in that sense, maybe the responsibility of economic policymakers would be geared much more towards spelling out who's going to be affected positively, who's going to benefit. And maybe that is also a credit we can take as progressives, that most of the proposals we have are beneficial to most people, or to at least to the greater part of society. And maybe that's a message we need to convey more confidently. And on the other hand, the opposite would also be true, that if there is clear-cut policies for very specific or elitist group of society, that we have to spell that out if the others don't.
I think it's one message here is also be honest about the distributional impacts of your policy. So if you talk about minimum wage, right, or I don't know, animal protection in the area of other policy areas, or higher prices for imported goods and so on. It will have, of course, this distributional impacts, and And if the minimum wage is 12 euros, it's not cheap. Labor isn't as cheap anymore. I would argue it could be even higher, but still, I mean, this is a relative change of prices, and so you have to, I guess, convey the message that we don't do this because we want to make it more expensive, to like have your pizza delivered. We do this because we believe, this is it's better to live in a society where everyone can live from the job he or she has, live a decent life, than to not have a decent life and spend X, Y, Z billions to subsidize the wage. So I think of Switzerland, right, where you have, I think the minimum wage in Zurich is about 4,000 euros, 5,000 euros. Of course, it's expensive to go out for dinner there, even if you earn a lot of money. But maybe it's a better way of organizing a society where, from the bus driver to the whatever investment banker, there are still differences, huge differences, but it's not that there's this extremely low wage sector we used to have in Germany. I mean, this is also changing. I think the low wage sector is shrinking, or has been shrinking in recent years, if I remember the statistics correctly. So, but so also as with fiscal policy, there's a way of looking at society that lays behind all these economic policy wonkish questions. I mean, we don't do this for the sake of it. We do this because we think there can be progress in the way people live together.
So maybe because we're in the last 10 minutes, are there some metaphors you personally use when you talk to non-economist friends that you use and you find useful for explaining? I mean, is it maybe something? Probably, Mark, you have written it down probably already, but are there some metaphors you think that are particularly useful and that we should try to use more often?
I can only think of things we shouldn't use. So we shouldn't say the central bank pumps in money into the economy, because then the question obviously is, where's the money? I haven't seen any of that money. So and there are many examples of this. But I mean, you wrote a very nice piece about this. The challenge, of course, in the public discourse is you don't have 3 or 4 pages. You have to convey this in a paragraph or so, and then it's getting extremely difficult. And really, since the first article I wrote, I'm struggling with what are the right, especially with monetary policy, because it's so important and so counterintuitive in a way. And what are the right ways of phrasing this without resorting to this hydraulic metaphors which lead you to the wrong path? I mean, they just lead you somewhere where you don't want to be. Or you lose the argument. And so unfortunately, I can't think of a metaphor. The only thing I can say is you need just more space, and you have to talk to your editors-in-chief, or if you're a TV guy, to the person who allots slots or runs talk shows. Invite people and give them the time to explain what is going on, and ideally don't use a metaphor at all, but just explain, step by step what is happening. And this would be it would be so good. So I'm dreaming of this Sunday evening talk show on the ECB, right? And there are people from the right side of the debate and left side of the debate, but they have the good people, and they have the time to explain to the ordinary TV viewer what is going on. I'm not so sure how many people will watch it, but something like this should happen.
Yeah, I think it's quite important to have a sort of open space about the debate, just like Mark said, and maybe, what I think, the crucial exercise is to continue to debunk what's out there and what's wrongly out there, and to kind of resolve this image that the state constituted by all of us, and us as a private household are very different actors. And I mean, in a way, that image of a body I mentioned earlier, to me, it also means to bring back the idea of collectivism and democracy in an area that seems so technocratic that people often step out. I mean, I do observe a lot that people feel very feel very confident to speak about social policies or maybe labor policies because that affects them directly. But as soon as it comes to finance and economics, most of them would not be confident enough because they don't find the right words, and they say, well, I don't really know what's going on, so I won't even start. And I think that's definitely something we can maybe shake a little bit if we speak more vividly about economic policies in a way of a body, or in the way the state as a body, or if we think about well, the capital stock and the state as an asset manager. And these images help, but also I think what is already out there and what we even need more is sort of collective action that really leads to financial education. And there are several progressive economists that have YouTube platforms, and there is think tanks that try to convey that message. And maybe we should actually add a bit of urgency to it also. And maybe we need something like Fridays for Fiscal Future, or like maybe we need a bit of a movement here as well.
Fiscal Future, and they are actually amazing people. So I'm not sure if you're following them. Anyone who watches us now, I highly recommend to follow them. I think they are doing tremendous work. But yeah, so what I think, what I thought about is, do you know maybe Patriot Act? Patriot Act is on Netflix, a show by Hassan Minhaj, and he's basically a nerd, like a very cool and good-looking nerd, but he's like definitely like a nerd in the sense that he likes to show graphs and explain stuff. And he does it in a very fun way, but he does it in a fun and deep way. It's very entertaining, but it's much deeper. And he has like not only an op-ed, he has 45 minutes for his whole show. And he's really able to explain stuff in an entertaining way. So I think it would be amazing to have like a fun to watch TV show that actually you want to watch, and that's not only about economics, but maybe about all kinds of different issues. And you had someone who explained it to you in a similar way. I think that would be amazing. So if anyone watches from a TV station or from Netflix, then yeah, I'd love you to start something like that in Europe also. Yeah, so we're coming to an end. Yeah, then maybe so then we yeah. So is there something you think that in our progressive discourse, is there a last thing you want to point out? Is there something we should improve? Is there a last point you want to make?
Yeah, I'd probably finish with also, firstly, I really enjoyed this conversation. So thanks a lot to the organizers and you too. Well, I think there are many ways in which we can tackle the conservative narrative, and each of us will have different qualities. Some may have the better potential to explain technicalities in simple terms, and others maybe have a sort of fun and nice way to convey a message, and by that will help this out. And others may produce great videos, and others may explain something on a radio show. I do think there are very different ways and potentials how we can convey progressive economic policies. And maybe we had a great start today. And yeah, I hope to be in the loop for further discussions on the issue. Thank you.
Yeah, I also enjoyed very much talking to you guys. for me, when I think about it, it's always important to go to the real thing. Do away with the concepts and try to understand what is the real thing these concepts are trying to grasp, and then start from there. And I not necessarily want to push a progressive agenda here, but I think Paul Krugman once said that truth has a liberal bias in the US sense of liberal. So nature and science is in itself progressive, I believe. So just if everyone tries to be as good as he or she is at what he or she does, then we probably this will lead us to a more progressive society without having to subscribe to a particular party or political group.
Yeah. So I think that is definitely something we can take with us. Also, that we that empiricism and using numbers that has helped the progressive discourse already in the last couple of years, and that our discourse has become more progressive since, say, the Euro crisis in 2012. And and what do we have also? And of course that we should talk about the positive aspects we actually want to achieve, and have like a more maybe offensive narrative, instead of trying only to debunk the myth, which is probably important for some of us, like me. I love debunking myths, but maybe it's not what a politician should do. They should basically have a more optimistic and forward-looking narrative of what they want to achieve with that. So I think we can we all have our roles to play there. And so thanks again to the two of you. I enjoyed it also a lot, and hope we see each other soon. And thanks for the audience, of course, for watching us.